Now the hallway. How long? I say, and my voice comes out flatter than I mean it to. Were you planning on pretending she doesn't exist? Diane doesn't look at me. She's fixing her earring in the mirror outside the ballroom, and behind her the string quartet is tuning, and behind that, through double doors propped with brass elephants, 200 people are finding their table cards. Callie, this is not the day, she says. You told the caterers, Mother, she cleans houses. She does clean a house. Her own. Diane, I don't have time for this. She turns, finally, and her face is the face she wears for photographers. Pleasant, tight, unbothered. Your sister is getting married in 40 minutes. If you want to have this conversation, have it with your father. Not with me. Not today. I want to ask her what happens when Renee walks through those doors in the pale green dress I helped her pick out 3 weeks ago, sitting in her kitchen with swatches spread across the table like we were choosing paint. I want to ask what Diane thinks is going to happen when someone asks, and who is this? And Diane's mouth opens and the lie just comes out. Because I already know it will. I've watched her rehearse smaller versions of it for 15 years. I don't get to ask. My father's hand lands on my shoulder, steering, and he's already saying my name in that low voice that means not here, and the doors are opening, and somewhere past the flowers and the string quartet and the 200 chairs, a man I have never met is about to pick up a champagne flute, look across the room, and stop moving entirely. But that's later. First you need to know what happened 15 years ago on a stretch of wet highway outside Millbrook. Then 15 years ago. I was 11. Josie was 7. It was raining the kind of rain that makes the wipers useless, and my mother was driving us home from my grandmother's house, and my grandmother was in the passenger seat still arguing with my mom about something that didn't matter. The way they always argued, warm and constant like weather. I remember the sound before I remember anything else. Not a crash, a correction, my mother's hands wrenching the wheel, and then the crash. My grandmother didn't survive the night. My mother's pelvis was broken in 4 places, her spleen was removed at 2 a.m., and somewhere in the 6 surgeries that followed, a resident with kind eyes and a name tag that said Webb started her on morphine that nobody weaned her off properly, because nobody was paying close enough attention, because the hospital was short-staffed and my mother was, on paper, recovering well. She was not recovering well. She was disappearing, an inch at a time, behind her own eyes. I didn't understand any of this then. I understood that my mother went from tucking me in every night to sleeping until 4 in the afternoon. I understood that the woman who used to sing off-key in the car now sat very still at the kitchen table, staring at a spot on the wall that wasn't there. I understood that my father started sleeping in the guest room, and that a woman named Diane started appearing at school pickup just to help, and that nobody ever told Josie or me the word for what was happening to our mother, so I made one up myself. I called it the quiet. My mother had the quiet in her now, and it had eaten the parts of her that used to be loud. I didn't know, at 11, that addiction has a shape. I know it now. I know it took 18 months, a second overdose in a Target parking lot, and one final, devastating custody hearing to give it its shape in our house. Now the seating chart. Table 14. That's where Diane put her. Not the family table. Not even the second family table, where my father's cousins from Ohio are sitting with their kids in clip-on ties. Table 14 is by the kitchen doors, where the waitstaff swing through with trays, where the tablecloth is a slightly different shade of ivory because it's the extra one, the one that doesn't quite match. I know this because I checked the chart myself. 3 days ago, standing in Diane's dining room while she and the wedding planner argued about chair covers, and I found my mother's name, Renee Ashford, typed in a font one size smaller than everyone else's, tucked between wedding planner, if staying, and photographer's assistant. I didn't say anything then. I photographed it and sent it to Renee with no caption, because by then we had a shorthand, my mother and I, built out of 2 years of texts sent late at night when neither of us could sleep. She wrote back, "That's fine, baby. I'm not there for the seating chart." I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I put on the earrings she'd given me for my birthday. Small gold hoops. Unremarkable, the kind of gift a person gives when they're still learning how to give gifts to a daughter who spent a decade calling someone else mom, and I drove to the venue 3 hours early to make sure I was the one who let her in the side door. Then, the custody hearing. The hearing happened in a beige room that smelled like carpet cleaner. I wasn't allowed inside, But I sat in the hallway on an orange plastic chair while a court-appointed advocate asked me, gently, whether I felt safe with my mother. I said yes. I meant it. I was 12. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until Renee told me herself. 9 years later, sitting across from me in a diner both of us had chosen because it was equidistant from nowhere, was that my father's lawyer had photographs. A neighbor's photographs, taken through a kitchen window, of my mother nodding off at the table while Josie ate cereal alone 6 feet away. My mother doesn't dispute this. She told me about it herself, flatly, the way you'd read out a diagnosis. I was so far gone I don't remember your sister eating that cereal, she said. I believe it happened. I just don't have it. The judge granted my father primary custody. Supervised visitation only, twice a month, in a family services building with fluorescent lights and a box of dollar store toys in the corner. My mother agreed to it. She has told me, more than once, that agreeing to it was the only clear-headed decision she made that entire year, because some buried, sober part of her knew that if she fought it, she would lose worse, and lose us for longer. Diane moved into the house 4 months later. Within a year, she'd stopped saying, your mom, and started saying, your mother's situation, the way you'd refer to a leak in a roof. By the time I was 14, Josie had mostly stopped asking about her at all. Josie doesn't remember the singing in the car. Josie remembers a stranger who showed up every other Saturday smelling like hospital soap, who cried in the parking lot when the hour was up, who eventually, because supervised visitation is expensive and exhausting, and the court doesn't hand out extensions for good behavior forever, stopped showing up as often as she should have. I remember all of it. I have never forgiven myself for how relieved I felt, at 15, when a Saturday came and she didn't. Now, guest list. The side door sticks. I have to put my shoulder into it. And when it finally gives, my mother is standing there in the pale green dress, holding a small wrapped gift and looking like she might turn around and walk back to her car. You didn't have to come this early, she says. I wanted to let you in myself. She looks past me, into the tent, at the 200 white chairs and the arch dripping with eucalyptus that cost more than her monthly mortgage payment, and something moves across her face that I recognize because I've been watching for it my whole adult life, the specific flinch of a person recalculating, in real time, how much space she's allowed to take up in a room. Diane already told the florist I'm helping with cleanup, she says. I saw it in the group text. Renee's staying after to help tidy up. Isn't that generous? She laughs, but it isn't a laugh. I haven't lifted a mop since nursing school, Callie. I go very still. Nursing school. I told you that. Didn't I tell you that? She hadn't. In 2 years of diner conversations and midnight texts, my mother had told me about the accident, about the morphine, about the year she calls, simply underwater, but she had never once mentioned that before any of it, before the quiet, she had been a trauma nurse. 11 years at Millbrook General, Level 2 Trauma Center. She told me about losing custody in exhausting, granular detail, and never once mentioned the 12-hour shifts, the code blues, the things she'd been before she became, in our house, a cautionary tale. There wasn't a version of the story where it fit, she says, and straightens my collar with 2 fingers, an old habit from when I was small. Go on. Your sister needs you. Then, the return to work. Here's the part of the story my mother told me on a Tuesday, over coffee that went cold while she talked, both of us pretending the coffee mattered more than it did. She got sober 4 years after the hearing. Not all at once. Nothing about it was all at once. But there was a morning, in a studio apartment above a laundromat, when she woke up and, for the first time in longer than she could count, wanted to be awake. She calls that morning her birthday now. She doesn't celebrate the other one anymore. Getting her nursing license reinstated took 2 years of paperwork, hearings before a state board that looked at her file the way my father's lawyer once had, and a probationary period where a supervisor had to sign off on every single shift. She did it anyway. She went back to Millbrook General, a different floor, a different unit, because the trauma bay held memories she wasn't ready to stand inside again, and she worked her way, slowly, back into being someone who saved lives instead of nearly losing her own. She never told my father. She never told Diane. Why would she? Nobody asked. And by then the story of who Renee Ashford was had already been written, agreed upon, laminated into the family record, troubled. Unstable. Someone to be managed, not someone to be curious about. The only person who ever asked what she actually did all day was me, and I only started asking 2 years ago at 26, when I finally worked up the nerve to find her number and call it. Cocktail hour. My mother is standing near the edge of the tent with a club soda, not drinking it, just holding it the way you hold something to keep your hands busy, and I watch Diane's cousin, a heavyset woman named Pat who runs the church rummage sale, approach her with the particular friendliness of a person collecting gossip. "And you are?" Pat asks. My mother opens her mouth. I watch the old flinch cross her face, the recalculation. "I'm Renee," she says. She's part of the household staff," Diane says, arriving out of nowhere with a tray of champagne like she teleported in specifically to finish that sentence. "Been a lifesaver getting the house ready for all this. Practically family, really." She laughs, bright and easy, and Pat laughs too, and my mother's face does something I will spend the rest of my life trying to unsee. It agrees. It smooths itself into the shape of a lie, because that is what 15 years of supervised Saturdays teaches a person to do. I am 3 feet away, and I say nothing, and I hate myself for it in real time. Pat wanders off toward the bar. My mother turns to me, and for 1 second the mask drops entirely. "It's fine," she says, before I can speak. "It's one afternoon. It's not fine. Callie, I came to watch your sister get married. I didn't come to win an argument with your stepmother in front of 200 strangers." She squeezes my hand, once hard. "Let it be small. Please. I don't know yet that in 11 minutes it is going to become the least small thing that has ever happened at a Hartwell family event." Then 2 years ago, I found her because I got tired of being the only person in my family who wondered. It took 3 weeks of quiet searching, a name on an old Christmas card, a nursing board public registry, a Facebook profile with 4 photos and no activity since 2019, before I found a phone number that worked. I sat in my car outside my apartment for 40 minutes before I called it. She picked up on the second ring like she'd been waiting 9 years for exactly that number to appear on her screen. "Callie," she said, before I'd said a word, and I realized she still had my name saved, still had it ready. We met at a diner 2 Saturdays later. She was smaller than I remembered, and steadier, and she cried within the first 90 seconds, and then apologized for crying, which made me cry too. She didn't ask for forgiveness. That surprised me. She said, "I'm not going to ask you to forgive 15 years in one conversation. I just want you to know I'm here now, for as long as you'll let me be." Over the following 2 years, in diners and parking lots and, eventually, her small tidy kitchen, she rebuilt herself in front of me in pieces. I learned she'd been sober for 9 years. I learned she'd requoted to full-time RN status 18 months ago and had just been offered a charge nurse position she was terrified to accept. I learned she still had the swatch of my baby blanket in a drawer, that she kept every court-ordered visitation log because it was the only record proving she'd shown up as many times as she had. I told Josie none of this. Josie was 22 and building a life with Trent Hartwell and his enormous, immaculate family, and I told myself I was protecting her from complication. The truth is I was protecting myself from the argument I knew it would start with Diane, who had built our entire household mythology around the idea that Renee Ashford was a closed chapter, a cautionary tale, a woman who had, in Diane's words, made her choices. I invited Renee to the wedding without telling Diane it was really me who wanted her there. I said it was Josie's idea. Josie, to her credit, said yes without asking many questions, because Josie has always been kinder than the rest of us give her credit for. I did not anticipate Table 14. I did not anticipate household staff. And I certainly did not anticipate Dr. Marcus Webb. Now the freeze. He comes in with the Hartwell side, silver-haired, tall, wearing the kind of tuxedo that's been tailored twice. Trent introduces him at the edge of the dance floor as Uncle Marcus. My dad's brother, he's a trauma surgeon, don't let him talk about work all night. And there's the easy laugh that line always gets. I watch him take a flute of champagne off a passing tray. I watch him scan the tent the way people do at weddings, cataloging faces, looking for someone he knows. I watch him find her. My mother is standing near the dessert table, in the pale green dress, and Dr. Marcus Webb goes completely still, the way you go still if the floor moved half an inch beneath you. The champagne flute stops an inch from his mouth. He lowers it, slowly, not taking his eyes off her, and I feel my whole body turn cold because I recognize the name now. Webb, the resident with the kind eyes, the one who started the morphine drip 15 years ago and never came back to check on the dosage. Except that isn't quite it, is it? Because his face isn't guilty. It's astonished. "Renee," he says. He says it loud enough that the 3 nearest tables turn. "Renee Ashford?" My mother turns, and for one full second I watch 15 years of practiced invisibility collide with a name spoken by someone who clearly, unmistakably, does not think she cleans houses. "Dr. Webb," she says, and her voice cracks on the second syllable. Then last week, 6 days before the wedding, my mother almost didn't come at all. I know this because she called me at 11 p.m. on a Sunday, her voice thin, and told me Diane had sent a text to the family group chat, the one Renee wasn't in, that I'd screenshotted and forwarded to her out of some instinct I still don't fully understand, laying out logistics for the day, and buried in the middle of it, between the timeline for hair and makeup and the note about valet parking, was a single line. "Renee has kindly offered to help with breakdown after the reception, so no worries about her lingering at the tables." "I never offered that," my mother said. "Callie, I never said a word to her." "I know. I don't have to go." "You do," I said. "Not for her. For Josie. And for you." There was a long silence on the line. Then she said, very quietly, something I didn't fully understand until 11 minutes into cocktail hour 6 days later. "Do you know who Trent's uncle is?" I saw the wedding website. "Marcus Webb. Should I know that name? He was my charge nurse," she said. "The year I went back. He's the one who vouched for me to the board when nobody else would. He's the reason I have a license at all." A pause. "I haven't seen him in 6 years. I didn't know he was Hartwell family. I didn't put it together until just now." I still didn't understand, then, what that meant for the day itself. I understand it completely now, watching my mother's name land across a wedding tent like a dropped glass. Now the room turns. "You know each other?" Trent asks, looking between them, and the question hangs there while 30 more people at the surrounding tables realize something is happening and go quiet the way a crowd does when it smells a story. "Know each other," Dr. Webb repeats, and he actually laughs, disbelieving. "This woman ran my night shift for 3 years. Renee Ashford came back from the single hardest stretch I've ever watched a colleague survive and turned into the best charge Nurse Millbrook General has had in a decade. I wrote her recommendation for the unit council. I was at her ceremony when they gave her the Nightingale Award." He turns to the rest of the table, to Pat, to the cousins craning their necks. "Someone told me this evening she was on the catering staff." "She's not catering," I say before Diane can. My voice comes out louder than I planned, and it carries. Diane's smile doesn't move, but her eyes do, flicking to my father, to me, to the growing knot of guests now fully, openly listening. "There's clearly a misunderstanding," she says. "There is," I say. "You've been telling people my mother cleans houses since she walked in the door." The word mother lands in the tent like a dropped plate. I watch it ripple outward, Pat's hand rising to her mouth, a cousin leaning to whisper to his wife, Trent's father setting down his fork. And I watch Josie, 20 feet away in her wedding dress, turn from the friend she'd been laughing with and go very, very still. Then, what Diane never knew, what Diane never understood, what I don't think she ever tried to understand, is that the story she told herself about my mother had to stay simple to survive. Unstable. Made her choices. A cautionary tale. A simple story doesn't require updating. A simple story doesn't have room for a Nightingale Award, or 9 years of sobriety, or a woman who spent 9 years' worth of Saturdays showing up to a fluorescent-lit visitation room with a canvas bag of secondhand books because she couldn't afford new ones and refused to show up empty-handed. I used to believe Diane kept the story simple out of cruelty. I've come to believe it's simpler and sadder than that. She kept it simple because complexity would have meant reckoning with the fact that she'd raised 2 girls inside a story that wasn't entirely true, and that the woman she'd spent 15 years being quietly, comfortably superior to had, in fact, done the harder thing. She'd survived and rebuilt and kept trying, while Diane had simply been handed a version of motherhood that never asked anything of her at all. I don't think Diane is a villain. I think she is a woman who found it easier to manage a myth than to sit with a person. And today, in front of 200 people, the myth finally ran out of road. Now Josie, My sister crosses the tent in her wedding dress, holding the skirt off the grass, and everyone parts for her the way people do for brides. Is that true? She asks, and she's not asking Diane. She's asking me. She's our mom? That's our mom. Josie, Diane starts. I'm asking Callie. Josie's voice shakes, but it doesn't break. You've known, haven't you? This whole time, you've known where she was. 2 years, I say. I found her 2 years ago. I should have told you. I'm sorry. I didn't know how. Josie looks past me at my mother, who is standing very still, one hand pressed flat against her own collarbone like she's trying to keep her heart from climbing out of her chest, and for a long, terrible second nobody in the tent moves at all. Then Josie says, in a voice too quiet for most of the guests to hear but loud enough for the ones nearest to carry it outward like a current, I don't remember you singing. Callie told me once that you used to sing in the car and I don't remember it at all, and I have spent 10 years being angry at you for something I don't even remember, because that's what I was handed. That's the only thing anyone ever handed me. I know, my mother says. Her voice is wrecked. I know, baby. I'm not here to undo 10 years in one afternoon. I just didn't want to miss this one. Then, the Nightingale ceremony. The night my mother got the Nightingale Award, she told me, she sat alone in her car in the hospital parking garage for 20 minutes before going inside because she kept thinking about a version of that night where Josie and I were in the audience. She'd almost called the house. She got as far as opening the contact, my father's name, unused for 6 years, before she put the phone face down on the passenger seat and went inside alone. Dr. Webb gave the introduction speech that night. She remembers it word for word. She told me, the way you remember the sentence that saves your life. He said, Renee Ashford is proof that the worst year of a person's life is not the whole of who they are, if somebody is willing to still see them. She kept the program from that night in the same drawer as my baby blanket. She showed it to me the first time I visited her apartment, unfolding it carefully like it might tear, and I remember thinking, how has nobody in our family ever asked her a single question in 15 years? Now, convergence. There is no more than after this. There is only the tent, and the 200 guests, and my mother crossing the last 6 feet of grass toward her younger daughter in the white dress, and Dr. Marcus Webb standing frozen with his forgotten champagne, and my father, silent this whole time, the way he has been silent for 15 years, finally stepping forward. Renee, he says. She looks at him for the first time all day. David, I let this happen, he says. Not to Diane, not to the guests, to her. I let it happen for 15 years, because it was easier than fighting for something complicated. I'm sorry. I should have said that a long time before today. Diane's face has gone white and rigid. David! Not now, Diane. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't have to. Something in the way, he says it closes a door that's been open in our house for a decade and a half. Josie takes my mother's hand. It's a small motion. 2 hands, one older and lined, one young and shaking slightly from champagne and nerves and the dress and everything else. But I watch it happen and I understand that this is the moment the whole story has been walking toward, the scene where 15 years of separate timelines finally touch. Will you dance with me later? Josie asks. Not the mother-daughter dance. I already have that with Dad. Just later, when it's less of a scene. My mother laughs, wet and startled. Yes, she says. Yes, of course. Epilogue, 6 weeks later. Table 14 doesn't exist anymore. Obviously. The wedding is long over, the eucalyptus arch dismantled, the 8-tiered cake reduced to photographs on Josie's refrigerator. But something about it has stayed lodged in me, the way certain images do. Diane and my father separated 3 weeks after the wedding. I don't know if it's permanent. I know my father has started calling my mother to ask, haltingly, about things he missed. A school play, a broken arm, the year Josie briefly wanted to be a marine biologist. I know it isn't enough, and I know my mother has told him as much, gently, over coffee that this time didn't go cold, because for once someone was actually listening while it was still warm. Dr. Webb sends my mother a card every year on the anniversary of her Nightingale Award. He sent one again last month. She keeps them in the same drawer as the program, the baby blanket swatch, and new, this year, a photograph from the wedding that a guest took without either of them noticing. My mother and Josie, dancing at 11 p.m. with the string lights. Coming on overhead, both of them laughing at something neither will fully explain to me, like it's theirs now. A story that belongs only to the two of them. I used to think the worst thing my family ever did was lose 15 years. I don't think that anymore. I think the worst thing we did was decide, quietly, without ever voting on it, that 15 years was the whole truth of who my mother was. One guest froze at that wedding because he knew better. It took the rest of us a lot longer to catch up. She's not the help. She never was. She's Renee Ashford, RN, Nightingale Award recipient, my mother, and this year, for the first time since I was 11 years old, she's spending Thanksgiving at our table. Not table 14. Ours.